Hey guys, I've been doing some research on how players progress in the game and what the mechanics are for player progression. And I've noticed a couple interesting patterns that I'd like to share with you, and I have some theories around what those patterns represent and what it means for developing players in Master League and how you could go about improving that potentially. So I've tracked four players that I'm going to go through: Guruza, Jarvis, Rice, and Cofield. And I'm going to talk through each of these players and just talk to you about what I saw, what I did with the focus training, and ultimately how it panned out over 10 months. So these are 10 in-game months that I tracked them. And so we'll start with Cofield. When you look at Cofield, it's interesting. He gained 19 points across these different categories over the course of 10 months. But if you look at his progression curve, really, he wasn't supposed to do much. So he was going to gain about 2 overall points on the progression curve over that year period. And so it's interesting because even though he gained 2 points, you can see that he won. I was using focus training, so he gained points in areas I wasn't focusing on. So there is a natural amount of progression. But then two, he gained one in acceleration, one in speed, and then two in balance, which he was a lot lower on. And so because of that, I really think that the points that they're going to gain, so he was going from 58 to 60. It's relative in what you can train them in, what you can get out of them over the course of that training period. So, for example, 58 to 60, it's still very low. The players, it's a very low skill player. So even though they had a lot of points, you can see that there really wasn't a lot of progression. And in the two core things I was training them in, they didn't make a ton of progress. So I'll switch to Rice. Rice is much better. 64. I've roughly projected him to go to about 67 over the course of this 10-month period. And you see he only gained 13 points. But what's really interesting in the points that Rice gained, and what you can see here is one, he got two in finishing out of those 13, which is decent. It's mid-tier, 76, so going from 74 to 76. But in kicking power, he went from 83 to 85. And so this is kind of strengthening the theory that I believe that, you gain points based on the relative skill level of the player when the training starts. So his relative skill level is 64, going to 67. Those 3 points from 64 to 67, I believe there's a weighted experience component in there. So you're getting a different pool of available experience. So, for example, if we go back to Cofield, 58 to 60, maybe you're getting a pool of, let's say, that's 2 points. So let's say it's 200, right? Those 200 are spread across each of these different abilities, and therefore you can only grow up until that amount. And there's natural growth, and then there's training driven growth, and then there's play driven growth. So there's kind of three categories, and then there's amplifications, of course, based on the training, the team role, and then the playing time. So, but I think there's kind of a base amount of experience you get based on your starting position, so that when you go to Rice, you see that even though he gained three and the total was less, what he gained overall on taking kicking power from 83 to 85, it takes a lot more experience to get there. So we'll move to Jarvis. Jarvis is interesting, another 64. He had a little less traction than Rice previously. Same starting point, but a lower ending point. And what was interesting here was he overall gained less, but you can see again acceleration +1, kicking power +2, and then more importantly finishing +1 from 87 to 88. So I do think there's a really large component in this kind of pool of experience that you can use to progress a player depending on their starting level, and I think you should take that into account when you train a player. The other interesting thing here is the non-dom leg precision. That didn't change at all, even though I trained him for almost a year, and you can see the shift. There was barely any shift there. So there must be a lot of experience that goes into training non-dom leg precision. I'm assuming conditioning and resistance all behave the same. So it's really important to understand that if you want to invest in changing conditioning or the leg precision, that it's going to suck up a lot of the experience points that you have available to you. One of the most interesting ones, maybe out of all of these, is Guruza. And what's interesting here is he had the highest starting point. So he had 69. His development curve was also pretty steep in comparison. And I've approximated it's about 72 where he would end at the end of this development cycle that I've tracked the 10 months. And so what you see here is a really interesting spike. Now, across the board, he gained 33 points when you take everything into account. Now, if you look, a lot of those points have come from things that I have not trained him in. So they're just natural progression. And I think what that makes me believe is that there are certain points where you can focus that give you essentially a boost, that use up more of those points, those available experience points in the things that you're focusing on. However, a player's always going to naturally develop. So you don't have to essentially develop a player in specific areas. He's naturally going to develop. And because there are more points available, because the pool of points from 69 to 72 has to be larger. So, if we were 200, if we go back to Cofield, if from 58 to 60 we were 200, for Guruza, maybe that pool's 1,000 now. And so you just have more points to spend to take from one level to another level. And so this is, I think, a really good judge. If you see a spike where a player is going from, 69 to 72 or 70 to 73 or, 72 to 76 or something like that, what you then know is that you have the ability to really push certain abilities that you want to have on that player very, very quickly. So, for example, if a player is taking a spike from 75 to 78, you know that there's a lot of experience points in that spike. And so what you can do is you can take those points and then focus them on a specific area that they're either weak on or strong on, and you're going to see a large amount of growth, especially if they're low in those areas. One of the other things I think was really interesting when I went through this analysis is I actually tracked the analysis by month, and what I saw was the growth was pretty static between the focused abilities. And what I mean by that is, so in this example, I have 5 focused abilities. If we ignore conditioning for a second and take a look at the top 4, offensive awareness, ball control, dribbling, and tight possession, what I found was regardless of the amount, so 67, 74, 71, if you look at the month 10 chart, regardless of the number that was in that box, they all grew at essentially the same pace. And so what essentially it tells me is that when you select that focus training, that you essentially get a kind of a predetermined outcome in how quickly it can grow based on what you've spread it across, right? So it will use those in a very a kind of normalized way, or in a way that it's spread evenly across each of them from a time standpoint versus a kind of focused experience standpoint. So a good example was Jarvis, where he started off at 87 and went to 88. But if you look at the other skills, set piece taking, for example, he started off at 44 and went to 45. And so the pace of growth between taking a player from 87 finishing to 88 finishing versus 44 set pieces to 45 set pieces was exactly the same. So I believe that there's a component where once you select your focus training or your training type, it already redistributes the available experience points across those to make the progression even as you progress from month to month. So really important to understand that component as well. So ultimately, when I look at all of this put together, what it tells me is this. Firstly, if you're going to train a young player, look for the progression chart, and specifically look for very short periods of time. I would say, a year period of time, and see how they're going to jump and where that spike is going to be within that period of time. And that essentially will give you an idea of a specific amount of experience that you can spread across that time period, and how you can use that to boost specific abilities that you're looking for. So, if you really need a fast player and you have an average player, you know that if they're going to hit a spike on your developmental chart here, that it's going to give you the ability to gain, a couple extra points, 2 or 3 extra points in speed and acceleration if you focus in during that growth period. The other thing that I didn't test as part of this was skipping games versus playing games. It's something that I'm going to do later on down the line. I think it's important to understand. And then also, playing in very specific positions regularly. So whether they're on the bench or whether they're playing, I know there's going to be a modification difference there based on how many points they gain. So two important things to understand there. But really the most important factor is what the starting point is and what the ending point is on the development chart. And that's going to tell you really how many points that you get to spend. And if those points are focused, you will get a lot more if there's going to be a spike on very specific abilities that you want to move forward. And if it's more of a average or developmental chart, then ultimately you can spread them across, and it doesn't really make a difference because the natural growth will take care of it. So that's the kind of the core outcome. I'm gonna take a look at a couple of players. If you want to suggest some players, happy to do so. I think I'd love to take a look at some players that you guys are playing with. So that's what I have for now, and I'll come back with some additional player analysis and some of the other stuff we talked about. Thanks, guys.